Hi, on today's episode of Needle to Know, we're going to talk about the ladder stitch. I use the ladder stitch when I'm attaching binding to dresses, to quilts, or to anything that needs somewhat of an invisible stitch. If you've watched my videos, you've seen me make this Huswif, which is also called a housewife. But this ribbon on the front tie came out of the binding, so I needed to remove the binding, reattach the ribbon, and then sew the binding down. So I'm going to show you how I use the ladder stitch to reattach that binding. I have my tools today. The project I'm going to work on: pins, my snips, a thimble, and needle and thread. So in order to fix this ribbon, the first thing I had to do was unpick the binding from the hand sewn side, which is the inside of the Huswif. And then I also had to unpick it from the outside, the machine sewn side. Once I did that, I pinned it back, I pulled the ribbon through, pinned it, and then I obviously didn't change the thread in my machine because you can see the dark navy thread there. But then I just re-stitched the binding on using my machine on the first side. So now I will just re-pin this binding down to the inside where I'm going to hand stitch it, and I will show you the process of stitching it back together. So now that we have the binding all pinned in place and it's ready to sew, the first step is to secure your thread to the piece you're working on. And I have done that. I secured it to the linen layer under here. And now I will get started. Since it's secured to the linen layer, the first stitch I want to make is in the binding. So I poke my needle right through the fold, and I travel along the fold about 1/8 of an inch and pull it out. Then I do the same thing on the linen layer. Go into the linen layer just where the edge of the binding is going to meet it, travel about 1/8 of an inch, and come up. So this stitch ends up being mostly invisible. When I'm stitching through a particularly thick part of fabric or a piece that's going to get a lot of wear, I take tiny stitches to give it extra strength. Try to come in close here to show you. Right here's where the last stitch came out, so I'm just going to go in right there, travel about 1/8 of an inch down the binding, and loosen this up a little bit. Maybe try to zoom in and show you the stitches. So you can see that there, they look like ladder rungs, which is why this is called the ladder stitch. Then you can just pull it tight and the binding is secure again. Honestly, this right here, getting the needle into the fold, is the trickiest part. I tend to have the shakes, so it's a little more difficult for me. Well, I don't know if it's more difficult. It just, my shakes make it difficult. So now we've reached the end of the part that I seam ripped to rebind. So we'll just secure the thread, and I will secure it again to the linen layer. Trying to do this under the edge of the binding. It doesn't always work. And then the last thing I do is I insert my needle right where I ended, and I just travel a little bit along just under the linen. Pull my thread out and snip my thread. Huswif is all repaired and finished. I have a nice strong ribbon now, and I can get it ready to use for my next project. If you liked this video, go ahead and give it a like. I will see you again soon. Thank you for watching.